Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to start us off by welcoming you. Good evening. Welcome to this Kenyan Review reading with and double book launch for Amy Butcher and Ira Sukrungruang. An all-out celebration of memoir with Amy's book Mothertrucker, which was released 4 days ago by Little A, and Ira's book This Jade World, which was released last month by the University of Nebraska Press. I am Elizabeth Dark, Associate Director of Programs for the Kenyan Review, and we, along with our co-sponsor, Kenyon College's Richard L. Thomas Chair in Creative Writing, are delighted to have you with us for this event. If you would like to access closed captioning for this evening, you may do so by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And if at any point you experience technical difficulties, our intern Ocean Way is keeping an eye on the chat and is ready to assist if you want to private message them there. We will also be posting helpful links throughout the evening, so keep your eyes open for those also in the chat. And we will keep the chat open during the reading for encouraging comments to our readers. And after the reading, we will take some time for questions, which you can ask indirectly by putting your question in the chat, or you can ask it directly by clicking on the raise hand option or writing something like question or I have a question in the chat. And then we will call on you, and when we call on you, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. As an audience member, we welcome you to keep your camera on during the reading to give our readers some friendly faces to look at, or you may turn it off if you're finishing up your dinner or walking around and don't want to distract us by your surroundings. Regardless, please do keep yourself muted for the duration of the reading. During the reading, we will spotlight the Kenyan Review Associate introducing our authors, and then of course the authors themselves as they are reading, but you will note that you have some viewing options to choose from in the top right corner of your screen. If you click on the view button, you could choose speaker, you can choose gallery. You can also change the size of the visual by moving, let's see, I think it's on the right side, that little bar, any way you like as the reading is in progress. And let's see, when we get to the Q&A portion of the evening, we will remove the spotlight, but you can continue to select spotlight speaker at that point as well. The Kenyan Review is fortunate to have about 80 Kenyan Review associates. These are wonderful, literarily minded Kenyan college students who are crucial in helping us accomplish all that we do, both as a journal and as a literary arts organization. And tonight we have two of our associates, Ocean Way and Sarah Pazin, introducing our guest authors. And I will now give the floor over to Ocean to introduce our first author, Amy Butcher.
Thank you. Amy Butcher is an award-winning essayist and author of Mothertrucker, Finding Joy on the Loneliest Road in America, which was released by Little A/Topple Books on November 1st, 2022, which in July 2019 was acquired by Makeready Films for film development with Primetime Emmy-winning Joey Soloway directing, Academy and Golden Globe winning actress Julianne Moore in a starting role. Her first book, Visiting Hours, which was published by Blue Rider Press / Penguin Random House in 2015, earned star review and praise from the New York Times, Sunday Review of Books, NPR, Glamour, Cosmopolitan, and others. Additional essays have appeared in Granta, Harper's, The New York Times Modern Love, The New York Times Sunday Review, The Washington Post, The Denver Post, Iowa Review, and LibHub, amongst others. She is the Director of Creative Writing and an Associate Professor of English at Ohio Wesleyan University and teaches annually at Iowa Summer Writing Festival and the Sitka Fine Arts Camp in Sitka, Alaska. She lives in Ohio with her 3 rescue dogs, beautiful beasts. Tonight, we celebrate the launch of her most recent nonfiction book, Mothertrucker, alongside the work of Ira. Mothertrucker was released just 3 days ago, and you can purchase it at the Kenyan Review bookstore. Keith Lehman, author of Heavy and Long Division, praised the book, quote, I used to wonder what it would feel like to read a nonfictive piece of art that reads like a literary novel, a mystery, a feature, the best of travel writing, and a welcoming theory. Now I know. A lot will be written about what Amy posts up in this book. It is the how that is unsettling in the best way, the how that moves this book from remarkable to a gritty greatness we seldom experience in American literature, end quote. Excerpt of Mothertrucker awarded a 2020 Individual Excellent Award by the Ohio Arts Council. Judges call it well-researched, very well-written, and a positive antidote to the trauma of violence against women. You can find more of Emmy's work at her website. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ocean. That was a really lovely introduction. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the Kenyon Review and to Kenyon College for having me. Thanks to all the smart students that I met with earlier in the masterclass. We talked about how do we write about periods of time in which nothing really happens, which when you're talking about a book that follows a woman in a pickup truck for 16 hours, there's a lot of that. How do you make it interesting? I also want to thank Elizabeth Ann Dark and Sarah Pazin, and of course, Ira Sukrungruang, who I'm so happy to be reading with and celebrating this night of memoir. So thank you. I'm going to be reading from the new book, Mothertrucker, which came out Monday. You are the second reading I've done from it, so it's still really new. And actually, I think I was deciding even as early as, or as recent as a few minutes ago, what exactly I want to read from. But thank you for having me, and it's really a delight to be joining you tonight. I should mention the 3 rescue beasts are the reason I'm in my office tonight. So here we go. I'm going to start. My plan for tonight is to read 3 short excerpts from the book to give you a sense of scope and structure, and I will do my best to contextualize in between. But essentially what you need to know is that I followed a woman on Instagram who went by the handle Mothertrucker, both on Instagram and also as a truck driver in Northern Alaska. And I stumbled upon her on Instagram, became really sort of obsessed with the pictures that she would post and the life that I imagined that she led and lived up in Northern Alaska. And I think the thing that's also important to foreground is that I was in a relationship at the time that I didn't use the term abusive. I codified the language. I talked about it as toxic. I talked about it as unhealthy. At times I said I was afraid, but things were escalating for me in my life. And yet, because it hadn't reached this idea of what I considered abuse to be, I wasn't yet talking about it in those terms. So a lot of the early part of the book is really foregrounding sort of my situation and what it was that made me not only want to pursue writing about this outrageously brave woman who essentially drove the James W. Dalton Highway, which is a 400-mile stretch of road. It is the largest and longest serviceless road in North America. It extends from Fairbanks, Alaska, all the way up to the oil fields of Prudhoe Bay. And essentially, Joy was the only woman, Mothertrucker was the only woman to drive an 18-wheeler on this road, which she did 2 to 3 times weekly for 13 years. There are a lot of women who drive pilot trucks on the road, which are essentially, small pickups that warn of oncoming big loads. But Joy was the only one who drove an 18-wheeler, who tied down her loads, who navigated the steep overpasses. And what was really interesting to me about this was not only that she was the only woman, but that this was a road that I had read had been called the loneliest road in America, the most isolated road in America, and also the deadliest road in America. So I wanted to know what that was like, why someone would do that. But also, and this was a part that I never expected to be a part of the book, I needed some distance and some space to get some clarity for me about what was happening in my own life. I did not feel strong. I felt incredibly weak. And so in a lot of ways, I think flying north to Alaska was a means of escape. I'm going to start with the prologue because that's the natural beginning spot, but I do want to give a content warning here that this prologue, it's intense, it's intentionally intense. Specifically, it speaks to femicide, the murder of women across this country, the larger nature of domestic violence, intimate partner violence as an epidemic in our country. For those reasons, if that's something that's sensitive to you, I encourage you to turn mute on and mute me. The prologue is only about 2 pages. And at that point, I'll open it up again. And I know our friends Sarah and Ocean will let you know in the chat that it's safe to return. But I wanted to ground that. So I'll start with the prologue and then give a little bit of context and jump to later parts of the book. Prologue. The year that I met Joy was a consistently dangerous year for women in America. We were killed in public parks and parking lots, on sidewalks and in our cars. We were killed too in basements and back bedrooms and on front porches while babies slept. We were tied up, tied down, kept hidden in secret rooms. We were drugged and dragged and beaten, yelled at and made afraid. Men moved around us like the weather, like things to be endured. We suffered at our workplace, and we suffered in our bedrooms, and we suffered at the hands of people who, in theory, loved us the most. From my small town in Ohio, I began to think of women's bodies and the many places they should not go. The woods, for example, where 3 female joggers were killed in their own American communities in just one August week alone. Women should not jog alone, but also they should not walk alone, hike alone, camp alone, make their way across a parking lot alone at night or during the day or in the morning with too many bags or one bag or no bags whatsoever. The year that I met Joy, an Iowa woman was strangled to death while out for an evening run among the cornfields, all honey gold and shimmering, the sky like a pastel painting, like a Grant Wood tableau. America and our American violence. In Ohio, a woman was murdered while mixing a bowl of macaroni and cheese. In Colorado, while putting her children to bed. In Michigan, while shopping at Kohl's, and in New York City sleeping, and in Central Texas gaming, and in Southern California swimming. In Pennsylvania, a woman from my hometown was murdered by strangulation and blunt force trauma 1 week after beginning college. Her body was transported over 100 miles and to 3 separate locations via lift. First in a blue plastic storage container, then in a duffel bag, folded as if clothing. Her body treated the same as a Gap t-shirt or Nike joggers before police identified her attacker, a 29-year-old male who, when police arrived, was found cleaning blood from his apartment. And in the Ohio town where I now reside, a woman 2 years my junior was found buried in a shallow grave at the entrance to the hills I like to hike. People don't respect human life no more, her grandmother told reporters. It was a crisp day, early autumn. God gives it and people just take it. There were many women who were never found. There were many women found unidentifiable. And there were a multitude of men made famous for the murders they'd committed against their women. A Colorado husband, for example, earned primetime coverage for the murder of his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste. It was exactly the type of national coverage reserved for missing white women and their grieving, sullen white husbands. I just want them to come back, Christopher Watts told camera crews, incredulous. He stood on the front porch of his home. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. It's like a nightmare I just can't wake up from. If they're not safe right now, that's what's tearing me apart. It took prosecutors less than a month to determine Watts had strangled his wife to death and killed his 2 daughters through beating and suffocation, despite the 4-year-old's coherent pleas, a detail the media lamented ad nauseum. He then drove their bodies to a commercial work site where he dumped his wife in a patch of overturned earth, his daughters in an oil drum. All of this only hours after a backyard barbecue where the children paddled around a pool in hot pink bathing suits, tiny pigtails matted against their heads. He was texting his girlfriend as they swam, police later reported, perhaps even finalizing their burial sites and the manner in which he planned to kill each one as the girls did cannonballs and reapplied sunscreen and played pretend tea party underwater, their tiny hands cradling tinier teacups. We read about the Watts family everywhere, but what happened to those girls and their mother is what happens to thousands of American women annually. Every year we are stalked and slaughtered, beaten and battered, snuffed out, slain. I knew this, but didn't really know it until the spring that I met Joy, and the man I loved more than any other, a man who was good-natured, funny, kind, stood in my downstairs hallway screaming, looming over me, lunatic. In the months before that evening, Dave had backed me into a bathroom, yelled until I was on the floor, and screamed at me so violently in a vinyl tent in Colorado that I lay stiff the whole night like prey, wondering if and how he might kill me. And I thought then, as I had several times prior, this is how it happens. This is how we die. So if our lovely interns might let the rest of the people know, they're welcome to come back. Essentially what happens from here is after months of following Joy, ultimately I call her and I explain only that I'm interested in her life and I would like to fly north to meet her. And of course, I'm a stranger, I live in Ohio, there's no reason that I thought that she would say yes, but on the contrary, she sort of laughed and said, sure, come on up. And a few weeks later, I flew on up to Alaska. The plan was to drive in her big rig up the Dalton Highway, again, that 400 stretch of road that is incredibly dangerous and lonely and isolated, but also cuts through one of the most beautiful parts of the country. At the time, Joy was injured, so it ended up that we took her pickup instead, which in some ways was a bit of a relief, right? There's less that can go wrong with a pickup as opposed to a giant 18-wheeler. But also in some ways it felt more dangerous and more treacherous. So where I'm gonna pick up here is we are about 300 or so miles north of Fairbanks and only another 100 miles or so to Prudhoe Bay. Yeah, I think that's all you need to know. The closer we get to Prudhoe Bay, the stranger the world becomes. Here, hundreds of miles north of the Arctic Circle, everything is bathed and glazed in a way that makes risk feel beautiful, that disguises the pervasive danger, the inhospitality of this land. Frozen puddles and potholes glint, Arctic foxes scurry across mounds of snow, and Joy reminds me that even the light is God, that he fills every space and barren crevice, that he is everywhere and anywhere, always with us, even in our fear. He's even in this truck cab, she tells me. It's why she feels so lucky to call what she does here work. I get to experience his closeness, she says, plus I make a lot of money. But the danger, I implore. I'm as safe can be, she says. She bats the air with her hand. And anyway, it's not just me. I'm doing this mostly for my children. I miss them, I do. And do I want to be with them? Of course. I want to be with my daughter, Samantha, especially. She's only 17 and I need to take care of her, watch out for her. She chews the skin around her nails and checks the rearview mirror. But I know enough about this world to know that I also need to provide. As a woman, you must provide. I feel that very strongly. And the best way I can protect my children is to have money in the bank if something, if anything, goes wrong. This road, I drive it because I want to, but I also drive it because I have to. Do you know what I am saying? I need to know that I have a way to care for me and mine. So she trusts the Lord to keep her safe. She tells me she's rarely scared, that she can feel she's in God's presence. He's always with us, she repeats. But up here, I don't know, I feel closer to him than ever. All the other stuff, the life stuff, it doesn't get in the way. I can feel him taking care of me. I can see his beauty everywhere. I settle in my seat. It's true that I feel a steady calm. I feel tucked in a cocoon. Is it God or is it joy that makes the world up here feel a little softer, the colors a little brighter? Is it God or is it joy that makes me feel like I am capable, that I am in control, that I am stable, that I am strong? The way I feel inside Joy's presence is how others articulate their belief in God. Joy is the feeling of warm pajamas, the sound of my mother singing me to sleep, the earth that held my body on the hottest summer days. Joy is the memories of goodness, of kindness, before new memories took their place. What you thinking about, she asks. And when she looks at me and laughs, I realize she has fueled a flame inside of me that had grown terrifyingly dim. Nothing, I smile. I open a bag of Cheetos and put one in my mouth. Don't fill up on that junk, she warns. We'll be in Prudhoe Bay in no time. I twist my body against the window, feel the stiffness in my joints. For as eager as I am to arrive, I feel possessive of this time, do not want to share my joy with anyone. We are just west of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Joy tells me, and outside the landscape is evolving. Every 10 or 15 miles, the earth takes on a new geography. What first looks like an ocean, all gray blue with rigid peaks, shifts quickly to tundra, flat as arid desert. A few dozen miles later, we're on the moon. There it is, Joy says, pointing beyond the windshield, a sundog. It is radiant and white, as if God himself laid a halo, golden glistening above the earth. Joy slides the truck into a pull-off and promises we'll move fast. There's no time to protest. I race out alongside her to meet the tundra. Behind us is the shadow of a mountain, but in the field beneath, the golden light cascades. The sky is a yellow arch, shooting forth above and setting a prism along the ground, white and impossibly bright. Our whole world is like a snow globe someone shook, and we are standing in its stable center. Holy shit, I say. The land around us appears empty, but I know it is full of life. This is Gwich'in land. I look east beyond the highway, towards fields that wind through indigenous canyons and sunlit valleys, steep summits and downhill drops, and the relentless flow of the Yukon River. In addition to the Gwich'in, the Alaskan Arctic all around us is home to the Ta'ana, the Kyokin, and the Inupiat, all of whom migrated to this area several thousands of years ago, settling into the land, establishing varied and complex cultures, and prospering over time through the development of language and the study of migration and climate patterns. Some 9,000 indigenous people still inhabit this area, dispersed among 15 villages scattered throughout the Alaskan Arctic. We may not be able to see them, but that does not mean that they are not here or that they are not affected immediately and adversely by the decisions that we make. Quiet as quiet gets, Joy says. And while it's true this area might look empty or uninhabited, it is, quote, always already inhabited, a term used commonly by literary theorists and philosophers to denote things that have happened already and are still happening always. Explains activist Andrea Smith in her essay, Heteropatriarchy and the Three Pillars of White Supremacy. One of the pillars of white supremacy is, quote, the logic of genocide. This logic, she writes, holds that indigenous peoples must disappear. In fact, they must always be disappearing in order to allow non-indigenous people the rightful claim over this land. Through this logic of genocide, non-native peoples then become the rightful inheritors of all that was indigenous: land, resources, indigenous spirituality, culture. As author Kate Shanley notes, Native peoples are a permanent present absence in the US colonial imagination, an absence that reinforces at every turn the conviction that Native people are indeed vanishing, and the conquest of Native land then is justified. My thoughts return to Coldfoot Camp, to the arguments for drilling for oil just beyond this place. Joy squeezes her hand in mine. I don't know if this is cliche, she says, but I always make a wish on sundogs, or a prayer if the spirit moves me. She closes her eyes and folds her hands. I close my eyes and do the same. Are we wishing or are we praying? And might we do more than this? I think back to Sacred Heart Christian School, how Joy's own pastor asked us in earnest how different the world would look if our love of God drove evil out. Why is it always God, amorphous, invisible, elusive, save for the mind that houses him? We as people are enough. We have the power to do so much good. Joy lets go of my hand and we stand together in silence for a moment, taking in the rich expanse, the sundog and its bright white shimmering. I think back to those early, hot summer nights of my childhood, fireworks blinking in a field my father had let go to weeds. I think of my bare toes gripping river rocks in a neighborhood creek, pulling crayfish up from underneath to study their anatomy, their tiny blood-red claws grasping, eager to be released. I think that to be happy is to be free, and that the eraser, the ongoing exploitation and abuse of the people who have long called this place their home, requires a short-sightedness we cannot fathom. I look back to the road, the white gravel dusty and built up along the edges. All day, I have seen and met and engaged with dozens of men and women who call Alaska home and who have made of the state their livelihood. Truckers and restaurant attendants and oil field workers shuttling in on an occasional plane overhead. But they have built their lives in vastly different places, other cities, even other states. The industries their jobs support and the industries that give Joy's life so much meaning is antithetical not only to Native politics, but to Native cultures, Native lives. I am grateful for Joy, grateful most of all for this experience, but I've begun to feel guilty to be on this highway, to be sitting shotgun in Joy's truck, to further exacerbate a wound through a land that is not ours. The highway is a symbol of freedom for Joy, of security, but from our vantage point this far out, I see the way it splits the valley like a scar across a body. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. I really resonated with your writing and thought it was so beautiful, even though obviously the prologue isn't as beautiful content, but definitely beautiful language that you've shared that with. So thank you. And with that amazing opener to the double book launch of this evening, we will turn to the work of Ira Sukrungruang. So Ira was born in Chicago to Thai immigrants. He's the author of 4 nonfiction books, This Jade World 2021, of which we're celebrating tonight, Buddha's Dog and Other Meditations, Southside Buddhist, for which he was awarded the 2015 American Book Award, Talk Thai, The Adventures of Buddhist Boy. He has also published the short story collection, The Melting Season, and the poetry collection in Thailand, It Is Night. Ira has received a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Nonfiction Literature, an Arts and Letters Fellowship, and the Anita Claire Scharf Award in Poetry. His work has appeared in publications such as The Rumpus, American Poetry Review, The Sun, and Creative Nonfiction. In addition to serving as the beloved Richard L. Thomas Professor of Creative Writing at Kenyon College, Ira is the president of the literary nonprofit organization Sweet, a Literary Confection. So tonight, alongside Amy Butcher's new memoir, we celebrate the launch of his most recent nonfiction book, This Jade World. Ira's words break free of grief and emotional disillusionment, as well as stereotypes of the sexless Asian man, and immerse us in the vivid landscape of Thailand on his annual visits to see his family. In This Jade World, he offers us a double love story of sorts, and one that uncovers a new perspective on love, and marriages and families, and the body and in ourselves. So yeah, please join me in welcoming Ira, and we'll take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. And I'm trying to gather myself after your reading, Amy. That was just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think I'm going to read 2 short sections from This Jade World, and then I'm going to read a small COVID piece, and I'll talk about that in a second. So This Jade World is a book that I wrote that was completely different from all the other books I've written in terms of process, right? I always tell my students that sometimes you need that emotional distance to write about work so that you can have perspective, so that you can see things from different angles, to approach the topic from different vantages. But when you go through a breakup that shakes up your identity, there's no such thing as distance. There's nothing I could have thought about during that time period, right? I was in a relationship with, married to a woman who was older than me, and in many ways kind of taught me how to be in the world. And I met her when I was young. So the things that she wanted were the things that I wanted. And so when we broke up, what was it that I want? Right. And this is something that I've been kind of talking about a lot more in my classes. And I think I see one of my former graduate students on the reading day. I think in his class, I posed a question to his class, like, so what did you guys want to be when you grow up? Right? Like, do you remember that question? And they're like, oh, I wanted to be a fireman. I wanted to be a dragon. I wanted to be all this stuff. And I'm like, so like, what do you want now? Right. And then I remember this. He's like, I don't want to starve. I'm like, and I just want to be happy. I'm like, what the hell happened to you all? Right. And so the more I started thinking about this issue of want, like I think wanting has been the thing that governs us all to want. And I think, the writing of this book was to really kind of delve into this question of what I wanted, right? And one of the things I wanted is addressed in this chapter that I'm going to read here called After the Hysterectomy. After the hysterectomy. When you meet someone at 21, someone 9 years older and wiser, you learn the world through her eyes. You are a blank slate, a boy who hasn't lost enough. You adopt what she wants and her views on life. Her interests, nature, birds, the infinite flat of Illinois become your interests. And suddenly, you, the urban misfit, find yourself donning a pair of binoculars and aiming them in a tangle of branches, leaning your ear to every tweet and twitter, every rapid flap of wings. And suddenly you want to retire in an old farmhouse in central Illinois near her family and grow corn and strawberries, raising horses you will never ride. And suddenly you begin to write poetry, love poetry, want to be a poet like she is, deep, dark, and mysterious with a gift for composing perfect iambic lines. Because of her, you don't want children. Complain of their noise and ruckus on planes, the way they can't control the yarn of drool dripping from their toothless mouths. But then a sadness sets in, a sadness that feels like a hand to the throat, because after all these years, you do not know what you want. You with the graying beard, you with the belly distending over the waistline of your jeans. This dawns on you as you sit in the waiting room of a hospital because your wife is having a hysterectomy. You think this is what you want too, because you can't bear the pain she suffers every month she menstruates, her headaches that fetal her in the center of the bed. You want this, but you don't understand why your right knee bounces with the ferocity that shakes the bench you share with other people, people waiting for loved ones, people who stare at the crazy Asian man with an unsillable knee. You want this, but the finality of this decision has taken away a path in your life, and the Buddhist you are wonders whether that path would have led you to nirvana. In that waiting room, you imagine a child, one you've created, one without a face, a child, yours. And you hear that child's laughter, and you feel that child's breath, and you understand why your mother clings to you, why she squeezes your arms and legs even now as if she thinks you are not real, a dream she does not want to lose. In that waiting room for perhaps the first time, you find yourself wanting. It fills you like the fragrant flood of a pond of lotuses, beautiful gaping blooms hungry with want. But you keep quiet. You do not voice this. What good would it do now? What good would it do when you are allowed to see your wife days from surgery, slipping in and out of the conscious and unconscious world with her new body? What good would it do when you hold her hand, her voice weighted down with wariness, asking how the dogs are, asking whether you put the garbage out and gathered the mail? A couple of years later, you will remember that hospital room. You will remember the overcast light entering the curtained window and the gray that permeated that space. You will remember how your wife's long hair fanned the pillow, how even in post-surgical sleep, she was beautiful. You will remember the slight murmurs in her sleep, some mysterious conversation had in a dream. This would be the end, though you did not know it then. The end, the end. And you will remember this in that gray hospital room, your fingers feeding ice chips to her cracked lips, one cold chunk at a time, this last intimacy, this last act of love. So the main present of this book is set during my annual trip to Thailand. My mother and my auntie Sue worked and lived in Chicago, worked as nurses and lived in Chicago for 36 years. And so when they retired, they returned to Thailand. And so before that, I'd been going to Thailand every other year, but since they retired, I try to go every year just to check up on them and see how they're doing. This is the trip after the divorce. So a year had gone by, and my mother and aunt, the two strongest women I know, and who raised me, they tried not to pry, except for this one conversation, and it's called sex education. Bangkok is overly crowded and polluted. The air, a dizzying mix of car exhaust and garlic. The city moves at a pace antithetical to my own. Even for a Chicago boy like me, Bangkok sets me on edge. I believe a mugger will jump out at me at any moment. I believe my ears will explode from all the sound. This is what Buddha meant when he spoke of chaos. It is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. After the hour flight from Chiang Mai to Bangkok, we spend the afternoon at Dui's recycling center. Dui is one of Auntie Sue's nephews. I refer to him as the godfather because his workers step lightly around him, because when he speaks, his voice reverberates and people listen, because he gets whatever he wants whenever he wants it. Recycling is one of his businesses. Construction is the other. At the recycling center, thousands of plastic bottles gather in mounds. Old newspaper and discarded tires find resting places along a blue plastic fence. The inside of Dui's office is filled with old toys and sporting equipment, golf clubs and tennis rackets, teddy bears and gumball machines. I find books on bonsaiing, Thai cooking, and novels by Peter Straub and Danielle Steele. This office is like Bangkok too, overwhelming, claustrophobic, a hoarder's heaven. I make myself as comfortable as I can on a leather love seat. My mother next to me, she tugs at my hair to keep from falling asleep. We have hours to kill before Dui and his wife B close shop. And because we're staying with them for the next week or so, we wait. Auntie Sue behind the main desk, a queen spinning on an old office chair that squeaks. I am on the phone with Deidre, asking her why she's up and when it's 1 a.m, asking her if she misses me. She tells me she has gotten used to sleeping with me, my warm presence in the bed. It's too cold without you, she says. I talk openly with my two parents in the room. I assume they aren't listening, assume their English has deteriorated past the point of understanding. Deidre and I say, I love you a bunch of times and bye a bunch of times more, and I miss you even more. Our talk is sickly sweet, the way new love talk is. When I hang up, I'm smiling. Auntie Sue stops her spin. You never spoke like that with Katie, she says. Like what? Love, 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 joop, joop. She puckers up and exaggerates kisses. My mother laughs, playing with a matchbox car on Dui's desk, a red Corvette. I don't know what you're talking about, I say, but I do, and my insides flush. I want to ask you something, Auntie Sue says. Don't be embarrassed. Oh boy, I say. I want to ask you about sex. Oh boy, says my mother. When you and Katie had sex, did she? Auntie Sue hesitates, searching for the right word. Climax? Oh boy, I say. Oh boy, says my mother. I want to know, Auntie Sue says, maybe that's why she couldn't get pregnant, and maybe that's why she got a hysterectomy, and maybe that's why you've broken up. It might be hard to believe, I say, but Katie never wanted children. Impossible, says Auntie Sue. She's a woman. I shake my head. This is what women are made for, Auntie Sue says. I do not get into an argument about feminism and body empowerment with my aunt, though she and my mother are two of the biggest feminists I know. These two feminists have spent their lives raising a respectful and open-minded man. I do not want to point out that she is childless because I know what she will say. How can I have a child without a man? Auntie Sue, who speaks freely about anything like she does now, seldom spoke of a past boyfriend or partner. In all the time I've known her, it has been my mother who, in all the time I've known her, it has been my mother who now hums Jingle Bells to herself. I think my boys are a little dumb, I say. I speak in English, hoping Auntie Sue won't understand and forget all about it. Boys, Auntie Sue says. Swimmers, I say. Swimmers, she says. Sperm. Oh boy, said my mother. How do you know? Auntie Sue peers over her glasses. Are you a doctor? A feeling, I say. A non-doctor making a doctor's diagnosis on a feeling. She laughs, then gathers herself, leaning on the desk. I'm asking, did she climax? Heat creeps into my face. I aim my eyes at the old robot toy, black with gold knobs. It's identical to the one I had when I was small, the one my father bought me from an Alsip flea market. Outside the main office, Dewey talks on a cell phone, pointing and wagging his finger. B is busy with empty bottles, stacking them in cardboard boxes. They are childless too. I wonder if Auntie Sue has had the same conversation with them. We can speak frankly, Auntie Sue says. I want to know. How do I tell my aunt that sex was a complicating factor in the marriage? That we went over a year without having it? That we consulted a therapist? That I often slept in the guest room or my office? That I hated my body? I don't know, I say. Listen, and Auntie Sue is off. She lectures on and on about the idiosyncrasies of the human body during copulation, the opening and closing of parts. She speaks terms I've never heard before, terms never covered in sex ed, when Mrs. W directed a pointer at a diagram of a penis and the class howled when she slapped the testicles with it. And then in seventh grade, sex made me squirm and shudder. I was not like the other boys in the hood who spoke of sex unabashed, who bragged about banging so-and-so and getting BJs behind the bleachers at school. Even when I had sex for the first time, I kept it to myself because verbalizing it was too embarrassing. Auntie Sue is not embarrassed. She is a fountain of facts. When she speaks medically, her English is crisp, the language of nurses. 20 minutes later, I feel like I can deliver a baby. Oh boy, my mother says. Thank you for that, I say. If you had a child, Auntie Sue says, it would be beautiful, and you will know a love like no other. She begins spinning again in her chair, round and round, counterclockwise. Give your mother a grandchild, you'll complete her life. Oh boy, my mother says. I think it's only fitting to kind of end with a piece about my son. I'm going to read just one, I'm going to read two sections from an essay that is in the magazine Waxwing. And it's kind of, I found that writing during COVID was very difficult. And so I gave myself a assignment of writing to a playlist, but the playlist I created on my on Apple Music was only about 6 songs long, and I had to write within like a section within the time period of each song, right? So that was my assignment, and then I went back and kind of revised it. So I'm going to read section 5 and 6. Section 5 is Elton John, I'm Still Standing. Bodhi, my son, is in the bathtub. Suds on the top of his head and shoulders. Toys drown all around him. Cars, action figures, robots. Deidre's rubber ducky collection floats in a sea of bubbles. Before Bodhi came into the world, Deidre amassed a substantial collection of rubber duckies. I brought some from Hong Kong and South Korea and Thailand. Seldom did the duckies see water. They sat as decorations around the tub of our office. Now, Bodhi claims the duckies. Now they swim on a daily basis. Play my favorite song, Bodhi says. What's your favorite song? You know, Daddy. Is it I Love Rock and Roll, I say? No, he says. Is it the Monster Mash? No. Is it Funk Soul Brother? He shakes his head. What is it then, I say? It's the one that sounds like this. He hums and splashes. Water flies out of the tub, streaking the walls Deidre painted a week ago. I tell him to chill, to keep the water in the tub. He says sorry, hums again. The tune sounds familiar and new. I don't know that song, I say. I kneel on the floor and sop up water with a hand towel. Yes, you do, Daddy, he says. I don't think so. Frustration creeps into his cheeks, his mother's trait, a red that rouges the cheeks in an instant. You know it, it's like this. I'm still standing. And he continues with random words that do not form a coherent sentence. Elton John, I say. It's my favorite, he says. Through our time together, Bodhi and I have listened to many songs, but not this one. And I don't think his mother would play it. Early 80s Elton is not her sound. A week ago, in fact, I proclaimed Elton John was one of the best musicians of our time, like Freddie Mercury. And Deidre posited that Phil Collins was. How are we even together, I said. How do you know this song, I say. My teacher likes it, Bodhi says. It has been 5 weeks since he last attended school. That last day when I dropped him off, they took his temperature and wouldn't let me walk him in like I usually did. I remembered him being carried off, Bodhi looking back at me, wondering what was going on. Do you miss your teacher, I say. He nods, suds falling into the tub. Do you miss school? Yes. What do you miss most? My friends and your teacher? She sings a lot. Bodhi sings Elton again and smiles. Can you play it? I find it on a playlist I entitled Resetting, which I made before Bodhi came into the world, when I thought there would be no Bodhi to come into the world. The world then was breaking my heart as it is doing now. And the playlist filled with songs by Bodhi and Prince and Joni and Billy tethered me to the planet when I thought I would float off. Quote, it was my reaction to still being relevant, Elton said in an interview. This boy in the tub throws a car into the air and laughing as it splashes into the water makes me feel relevant, more than relevant, necessary. I watch his joy. I've been watching him more intently since all of this, watching him, how he is growing up so rapidly, watching how sometimes he stares off into the distance, off into his imagination, watching him live and breathe and love in this strange time. And what is it that Elton says? Looking like a true survivor, feeling like a little kid, we're still standing. 6, the notorious B.I.G. Big Papa. When it gets to be too much, when your anxiety feels like a vice closing around the throat, when you lose the sense of who you are, you take long drives the way you used to when you were younger, in your teens, feeling teen angst. And the only way to alleviate this tightness is to be alone behind the wheel with the music turned up so high you can't hear anything. You drive, no destination, with the purpose of getting lost. To lose yourself in rural Ohio is easy. Fields lead to more fields to more fields. Roads are so flat you can see miles and miles ahead. Directions north, south, east, west lose meaning because you are headed nowhere, and nowhere can be anywhere as long as you keep your foot on the gas. Picking the right song is vital. To drive to the wrong song can have the opposite effect of intention, which is to settle and calm so you can exist and thrive. On these drives, the songs are never the same. Sometimes it's some sappy love tune by Air Supply or Chicago or Luther Vandross. Sometimes it's the electric guitar stylings of the early 90s hair bands like Bon Jovi or Winger. Sometimes, like this time, it's Dr. Dre and Busta Rhymes and Eminem, A Tribe Called Quest, Snoop Dogg, Queen Latifah, and Big Papa. And somewhere between some farm and some small town on some small road, somewhere an hour from home, you're becoming more aligned when you receive a text that reads, "He's asking where you are." And you turn on the GPS to get home, realizing, as you always do, you can never truly be lost, especially when someone is waiting. When you arrive, that someone will run and embrace your legs and say, "Daddy," with utter joy. He will hold you tight, bury his face into your thigh, and you will pick him up, noticing in the weeks at home how he keeps growing heavier and longer. And you will kiss both cheeks and forehead, and you will say, "Daddy's back. He's not going anywhere. Let's play." Thank you.
Thank you both for such a fantastically rich reading tonight, and I'm so excited about your books. And I love the fact that in this case we are hearing moments from your lives that are articulated in a beautiful way with words and sentences. We are entering our Q&A time. And I'm going to ask the audience to think about some questions that they might have at this point. And if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand, you can put question in the chat. And when we call on you, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Or if you'd like to put a question in the chat without asking it yourself, we can ask it for you. So many ways to ask questions to Amy and Ira tonight. I get to ask the first one and hopefully give you guys some time to think about the questions you have. But I actually, Amy, you got me thinking about this, and I was actually listening for both of you in your readings where you were actually writing about a time or a period where nothing really seems to happen. Because Amy, you mentioned that that's what you were talking about to the class earlier. And I know you had a full class to tackle this, but our crowd here tonight includes Kenyon staff, Kenyon faculty, Writers Workshop, previous participants, students, friends of yours, other authors, and readers of the KR. And I think we all probably find ourselves in moments where nothing is happening, but something about them makes us think they might be of import. So how do you write about moments when nothing is happening?
A really thoughtful question. So earlier I was singing the Gospel of Joanne Beard to the students in the master class. And what I said to them is what I'll say again now. If you're not reading Joanne Beard, you should pick up some Joanne Beard. She was really the essayist that seduced me into practicing essay. I told the students I was really a fiction writer and a poet in college when I was their age. And read a Joanne Beard essay called Warner and was immediately hooked. I had no idea that nonfiction could look the way it did when Joanne Beard wrote it. So the essay that I had them read today is called Sherry. And actually, if anybody wants to kind of join along belatedly, I made a little one-off on my website for our masterclass. And there's the essay there, as well as some discussion questions and the writing exercise. But essentially in that essay, it follows a woman named Sherry Trimble, who was a woman who in the 90s made the very difficult decision and controversial decision. She was a terminally ill breast cancer. She was terminally ill with breast cancer and made the decision to call Dr. Death or Jack Kevorkian, which the students, of course, didn't know who he was. He passed back in 2011. So it's a really interesting essay, but it spans 24 pages. And in that, about 2.5 to 3 years of Sherry Trimble's life. So we were talking about, in a lot of ways, it's such a difficult thing to do, is to write about such an enormous amount of time. And yet the essay does not just hinge upon these key moments like the diagnosis, right? Or this decision to call Jack Kevorkian and in some way have power or autonomy over the end of her life and going out in the way that she wanted to. So we talked largely about, there's some really fantastic moments in that essay. And of course you can find that on the website. But she includes basically the morning that she first realizes something is amiss. The essay begins with her work, which is she worked on Amtrak. And it's all of the things that normally I think a lot of writers would gloss over, right? In an essay like that, we would probably begin with the diagnosis. But instead, there's really 2 pages of her, walking up and down the train car, taking tickets. She notices an elderly woman has a small chihuahua in her bag that she's tucked in her pocketbook. And she writes specifically that normally it's her job to say, no pets allowed, but this time she lets it slide. And then she goes to the gym and she goes to the sauna and she takes a shower and she's obsessing about where she last left her credit card. She can't find her credit card. And then she walks into this doctor's office for what she thinks will be a routine mammogram and instead sits for 30 minutes after they take the x-rays, essentially waiting for what she knows by that point after 30 minutes is bad news. And so we talked about the way in which, again, I think a lot of times we gloss over that, but all of that information is not only necessary for character building, but also I think imitates the experience of something like that, where we're focusing on everything else and suddenly there's this moment of, wait a minute. And so that's just a really brief example, but I was talking about the ways in which I think we're smart to capitalize on creating and harnessing those everyday small moments, those throwaway moments, as a way of developing tension. And also, I think that particular passage makes her so likable, both in terms of her relatability, but also her kindness.
Thank you.
I add something? I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about that, and Amy, I totally agree. I think, Joanne Beard, foundational author, Boys of My Youth, is just a phenomenal collection. But I think having gone through COVID, where we were at home for a long period of time, where we weren't doing anything, I think that is proof that there's always something happening, right? And I think for me, the reason I love memoir, I love nonfiction, is that we're not looking at only the what happens, we're looking at the interior of what happens, how we think about it. And the more I keep thinking about our lives, I think we live in, most of our lives are living in the interior, in our brain, right? Especially with, I think, when people are going through depression or going through some really hard mental health issues where nothing is actually happening in their lives, right? Like there's nothing happening, but the whole ton of things are happening within, that mindscape. And so I think in many ways, I tell my students this too in a lot of my classes, I think, we present a persona for people to see, right? How are you? I'm fine, right? But inside, that's the truer story, right? These dreams that we have, these imagined moments that we keep turning to, actually tell us sometimes more about us than what we're actually doing, which is nothing, right? Right? We're sitting here binge watching something, but inside our head, we're someplace else. So I really kind of think that, for me, it's a kind of looking inward and trying to, I think, and that's the hardest thing in writing. Like, how do you find language to thoughts and ideas, right? That's the hardest part of writing nonfiction, is trying to try to find that language.
Thank you both. Sarah, you had a question.
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions for you guys, but I guess I'll go with, I suppose this would work for both, but I wrote it originally with the subject of Ira's book in mind, since in the best way, I always say that in the best way, I'm a child of divorce, and that I really supported my mom in doing that. And so specifically for Ira, but I think it's also applicable to kind of a similar subject of Amy's book, which is that much of your book concerns like reinvention and a greater understanding of what it means to love and be human, specifically through like the lens of like marriage and really serious intimate relationships. And I was just wondering how you felt your work would leave an impact on readers kind of across different life experience, from your students here at Kenyon to, and your contemporaries, to readers kind of all around the world. But yeah.
That's an awesome question, sir. Thank you so much. So, you know, I can let you in just the process of writing this book. When I first wrote this book, it was like, you know, the first draft of it was 120 pages, and it was completely selfish, right? It was something where I just needed to write it just to get stuff out, right? But there's a kind of phrase that I keep coming back to now when writing memoir and thinking about memoir is a phrase called sometimes you just need to rip the bandage off, right? And you need to look at the wound for what it is, right? Without trying to hide, without trying to protect, but just to really kind of uncover and really look at it. And that was, I think that's one of the hardest things about writing memoir, especially about, you know, hard moments in one's life, is to go back and look at that wound. But the honest, you know, the reason why I love this genre so much is the vulnerability aspect of it, right? That when I read a great memoir, right, when I, you know, here's a writer who is vulnerable on the page. And I think we live in a culture that fears vulnerability. They fear looking weak, right? They look at a vulnerability, there's a criticism to being vulnerable, right? But vulnerability is what creates community for me, right? This is why I've, you know, friends who have written about sexual abuse and assault would hear from readers who would say, thank you for writing that book. I don't feel alone anymore, right? And so, I mean, for me, just the you know, as we enter a deep mental health crisis in our country, right? You know, one of the things that I keep thinking about, especially as a teacher, is the idea of, you know, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to look at these, you know, these things that we're trying to figure out about ourselves. And for a lot of us, for, you know, a lot of my students, for myself in particular, I always end my classes with this line that says, find the thing that saves your life, right? And writing is that thing for me, has been the thing for me. And so maybe, you know, that thing about, you know, this sharing, you know, this life is, it's okay. People will listen. There's a community out there. You're not alone. And I think that's important to keep coming back to.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo all of that. The vulnerability is so key. I have so many ways in which I want to answer your question, Sarah. On the one hand, I want to, I think for me, when I said, I guess the primary advice I have is, especially for writers, is to allow the project to take the shape that it's going to take. When I started Mothertrucker, I was coming off of, my first book was incredibly intimate and personal. And at times, I mean, I wrote that book when I was really quite young. I finished it by the time I was 25. It came out when I was 27. And it felt just incredibly vulnerable. It's still, when people say that they've picked up that book, I still get really anxious about it, because there's things that I wish I had done differently. I think that will always be true, but I know it's especially true when you're writing about something that's really close to you. And when you're writing something that is so deeply intimate and personal, which by nature, I guess, is now what I do. But coming off of that book, I really wanted this to be a completely separate project. I wanted this to be a profile just of Joy. I had an idea that when I contacted her that I was writing a book about what it means to be a woman working a male-dominated industry. Joy was not the only woman I wanted to contact. I had an idea of contacting, you know, women across the country who worked, again, male-dominated industries. And I met her, and I instantly felt like the whole book was about her. Beyond that, this was a book I didn't want. I didn't see what in the world I would have to contribute to anything in terms of the story. Joy was incredibly brave and strong, and I didn't feel that way. And I also was not ready to write in any way about what I was experiencing in my own personal life. And yet, you know, all of 10, 12 hours in that truck, Joy and I are talking about, well, why do you do this work? And it became very apparent she does it because her first marriage was abusive and her second marriage was abusive. And for her, the need to have a security net that she could leave her husband, that she could take her child with her was crucial. I never expected that. I expected, the story that I was going to get ultimately was a story of the harassment that she's faced. I thought, there's no way in which this woman is respected up here. And I was completely wrong. And felt really stupid because the people that I met up there really respected her and called her a Hall Road angel. And so the book, if we're talking about why she's doing this, for her, it was deeply important that she said, if you're writing a book about how strong I am, you need to know why I'm strong and the things that I've had to be strong because of. And why I do this work is because I'll never make this kind of income in Fairbanks, Alaska, working in an office. And if she was willing to admit that, for me, it became really crucial to share that I'm up here for many of the same reasons. My relationship is escalating. She was the one who really insisted that I use this term abuse, that there are many ways to abuse another person and they don't all look the same and they're not all physical in that regard. Emotional abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse, all incredibly devastating and psychologically damaging. So like Ira, I think I really had to be open to the vulnerability. I think I had to write the story that was emerging from this time, no matter how much I didn't want to maybe do that. I also had a really smart editor who cut the first 40 pages, who felt like I had to be thinking about audience. And the first 40 pages were essentially establishing the ways in which I feel that the American culture not only is a patriarchy, but also insists upon women's fear and plays to that fear. And essentially an editor said, that's not something that you have to establish, that anybody that's going to pick up this book is going to know that already. So this is a long-winded way of saying, I really had to trust the process and write the book that was coming out of the experience and not anything other. And again, that vulnerability, I think if you have a subject that is willing to be that vulnerable with you, to some extent, I think you owe the reader that same level of vulnerability as an author.
Thank you. I like that idea of vulnerability. Although it's scary. Ocean.
Thank you so much for your insightful answers. Like, I feel like you two really touch on what I was gonna ask. Like, I am in a nonfiction workshop and I was originally gonna ask, like, what advice would you give to like young writers who are trying to process a difficult or like traumatic event in their writing and use it like as a tool of like exploring that. But I also want to ask a more general question of just like, what is the most memorable part of like your writing process, especially in writing a memoir? I feel like that is a kind of meta question.
Amy, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I was thinking about what I want to say here. To your first question, in terms of advice, sit with it. Don't be afraid to sit with it. I mentioned my first book as a way of saying, it got me to where I needed to be, which was, to be honest with you, I wanted to be teaching. I wanted to be working with young people, and it's so hard to do that without a book. So I don't regret it, but I do wish that I had sat on that book more. I think there's such an urgency and such a rush as a young writer that you want to cultivate a body of work. You want to have people reading and responding to your work, but also I think especially when you're working with something that is close to you, that's traumatic, I think giving yourself that luxury of time, allowing yourself to sit with it. There are pieces that I've started that I return to months or even years later and continue to work a little, and then I put it away again. It's too close. And I know that there's a certain level of power to something like that it requires a level of restraint that it can be difficult to have when you're so hungry to get out there and be writing. So I acknowledge that, but I also think giving yourself that time, letting the project again develop. I always feel like sometimes the field needs to lie fallow in order for something new to grow there, and allowing yourself that is so important. And now, of course, I forgot. Oh, the most meaningful part of my process. Oh, goodness. This is the basic advice here, but reading your work out loud, reading your sentences out loud. I work here at Ohio Wesleyan University, and I'm always joking with my students that they have to memorize their roommate's schedule and then work around it. When is your roommate not in class? Sit in your dorm room and read every sentence out loud. I'm blown away, Ira, and I have to ask about any level of poetry training, because you're such a wonderful reader. Like, your cadence and your rhythm and your musicality of your sentences is so fantastic that I absolutely know, without knowing, that you must read your sentences out loud, because the way that the words sound together is incredible. And you immediately will catch that clunkiness, that wordiness, that redundancy. Saying something like, she smiled with her mouth. I'm always crossing this off, and I'm saying to my students, read it out loud, because you're going to hear that it's silly when you say that she smiled with her mouth, or she took it with her hands, right? I'm constantly crossing out, how else would she take it? That bowl, or that piece of fruit. And you'll hear, not only will you hear that musicality and that rhythm, but you're going to catch those redundancies, that clunkiness, those words that do not need to exist. So I always joke, be a stalker about your roommate's, living situation and schedule, and make the most of that time where they're not there to sound silly and perhaps ridiculous, but to read your work out loud and listen to exactly how it sounds, because you'll train your ear to catch the musicality and the silly.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think I read everything out loud. The first listener of my work is always my deaf dog, and she loves everything I write. So, I mean, I think, to kind of go back to entering like hard material, Ocean, a lot of times for me that I found out through the years is that, writers are the worst enemies of the work, right? Especially when you're writing really hard stuff. There's that voice within you that says, why are you doing this? Is pointless. Why you want to share this, right? And then you don't actually write the work. And I face that all the time. And a trick that I've been doing to help me through it is that there's such a power with the first person pronoun I. There's so much power in this one letter word, right? So that I don't actually start with the I sometimes as a trick. Sometimes I start in the third person, right? And that forces me to be almost like Ebenezer Scrooge. Oops, something happened there. It forces me to be almost like Ebenezer Scrooge, who is able to look at his past from that outside perspective, right? To be able to look at his sins and see the sins, like see himself as a character. And that's the hardest thing, right? One of the things when you're writing about hard situations is that, one, because you've lived it, it's hard to depart from that and see yourself as a character. So one way that I like doing is to adopt a different, in that first draft, to adopt a different pronoun, to use a you, to use something else to fill that in. It's so easy to go back and fill that in with the I. And then you might find out that the you sticks. So like, for example, the stuff that I read today, there are a couple of things in the second person POV. And I love using the second person POV for short sections, because one, every time I teach a second person POV and I ask students for a response to the reading of it, they always say, oh, it's so intimate. The you is so intimate. It is intimate for readers, but it's a really wonderful distancing strategy for writers to use the you, right? And not take the I. So that might be, a way to kind of trick that mind, right? To kind of depart from the self, from the situation. And I think for me, the most meaningful part of writing nonfiction has been, at least for this book, has been the idea of just writing a book that not many people expect or want, right? I mean, I think one of the rejections I had for the book was, an editor saying, I really can't, sell chick lit written by a dude. Right, that's pretty much the rejection. I actually thought that rejection was the best thing that I've ever heard, right? Because that means I've written a book that to me is opening up a conversation that hasn't really been open for someone to talk openly, for a man to talk openly about a breakup and divorce, right? To talk about these things. And I think the most meaningful part is the thing that I keep coming back to with, when I went to a Claudia Rankine reading, and she's, when someone asked for like a tip for young writers, the thing that she says that, write the counter narrative to the things that exist out there, right? Write the things, don't let the culture write your story or tell you what you can and cannot write, right? Write the things that are important to you. And when I started thinking about it as writing a narrative that is not an expected narrative, right? That I was doing something that I wanted to do, not what someone wanted to sell or what perceived audience wanted, right? What they wanted, but something that I wanted and needed to. I felt that was the most liberating part, and that came years later, actually. Right? That came years later, so I mean, that would be the thing that how I would answer. That would be the most fulfilling, that moment where I thought, okay, yeah, you're doing something that's worth doing.
I like that. I like that a lot. We have a question from Charles Atkins, and then I'm going to wrap us up with a writing prompt that I have thrown together from things that you all have said. So Charles, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, I was curious about, for both of you, what some of your kind of stylistic influences were, and if you feel that you have found your voice or whether you're still developing it, like at what point, and how do you kind of divorce yourself and create your own independent voice?
I'm happy to take this one first, Ira, if that's all right. Charles, that question that you asked, like I was so anxious about that when I was a young writer, because I was so concerned about what is my voice. I really thought that I was a comedic writer. And I panicked that if I wrote a serious essay, how would I pivot back? And I think what I've ultimately come up with, right, is that, like Ira, who talked about, writing to a playlist, the way that like a song will influence, something's happening. But anyway, the way that a song will influence what we write, I find that with every project, I'm largely influenced by whoever I'm reading at the time. And so for each body of work that I've created, each book, I find that I'm really reading and rereading and visiting again and again a select set of authors that I feel like are speaking to it. And so I guess the image that I usually use with my students in the classroom is to imagine like a room, and it can be decorated in whatever way that speaks to you, but imagine that there's like 5 or 6 writers in that room, and you're trying to write something that those individuals would like. Right. In other words, there's no piece of writing that all of us unanimously agree is the best writing. In the same way that like Phil Collins or Elton John, we're all going to come differently. So I always tell my students, like, imagine a room and put 5 or 6 writers that you absolutely love, that you want those people to really love what you're doing, right to that room. Not everyone, right? That's overwhelming. Not, I always go back to Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling. I'm not trying to write something necessarily, especially now, that she's going to appreciate. I'm trying to write, for me, in writing Mothertrucker, I was reading a lot of Lacey M. Johnson. I was reading a lot of Melissa Febos. I was reading a lot of Leslie Jamison, primarily women identifying essayists who had a really smart style of blending memoir with kind of cultural criticism and also literary journalism. So there's a fantastic writer, T. Kara Madden, who I was writing to T. Kara Madden. And with each book, it's different. Similarly, when I was writing my first book, Visiting Hours, it's something of a true crime book, but it's also very rooted in memoir and sort of psychological thinking. And I was really obsessed with memory. So for that book, I was reading a lot of Lauren Slater. Dinah Lenny has a fantastic book about her father who was murdered. My first book concerns a murder. So again, like thinking about, instead of trying to write something that everyone will love, thinking about the 5 or 6 writers that really shape your work, and writing to that room in particular. And I love thinking of like Leslie Jamison and Lacey M. Johnson, cheersing with a glass of tea or something. But I find that really helps. And it's always different. And again, rereading, the value of rereading. because you, in the same way that you've trained your ear through reading your sentences out loud, you're training your brain in ways to write in a way that I think speaks to and undoubtedly shares the influence of those writers that you so admire.
That's an awesome answer. I just kind of, I've been thinking about voice, and I've been thinking about that question, and I've been thinking about how when that question is usually posed, it's posed in the singular, right? When did you find your voice? And I don't think, for me, I don't think it's one voice. I think in nonfiction, it's the opening of many voices that we have within us, right? And I keep looking, like writers like, who I love teaching, like Lydia Yuknovich, who within one chapter of A Chronology of Water, she goes through 5 voices, right, in the space of 2 pages, right? You have the voice of the abused, you have the intelligent writer, you have the voice of just external, like receptive voice, one that kind of just takes in. And even like listening, Amy, to your prologue, right? That prologue is written in multiple voices. We have this we collective, we have this reporter talking and listing about these violences against women across the country, and then we kind of narrow down or siphon into like an I voice there too, a personal voice that's talking intimately about her life. Within that 2-page passage, there are many voices, right? So one of the things that I think I'm kind of, the more I start thinking about voice, I think I don't think about it as a singular. I think about it as how many voices do exist in this one piece I'm trying to write, right? And I think voice is defined to me, because I have a poetry background. Voice is not just a auditorial sense, it's a visual sense. I think voice can be created by the look of the look of a page. When a writer decides to use one long, big, thick paragraph, is a decision in voice, right? When a writer decides to break to one sentence paragraphs, is a decision in voice, right? So for me, like the way I'm thinking about voice now is becoming a lot more like broader, right? And honestly, I think it's because we live in a very fractured world. So how can we expect one united voice when we're a fractured being, right? We have a voice that we speak to, to our parents with. We have a voice that we speak to. I have another voice I speak to my son with. I have another voice I speak to, so we have all these things. And so the question for a writer then is not just, how do I create a voice? The question should be, what voice or voices are going to be within this thing that I'm writing right now, right? And that, and that's for me, I think, just how I approach my writing now. Is like asking what language am I speaking? What voice am I speaking? Who's existing here? What's the tension here, right? Because I think in many ways, when you start narrowing down conflict, it's sometimes a conflict of 2 languages that don't belong on the same page, that are not hearing each other, right? You have the voice of, say, adolescent ordinary Ira versus the voice of like Thailand mom, right? And those language just don't meet. So I think it's much more deeper exploration in that.
Thank you both. Such a rich conversation with so much good advice to take away from the evening. I have thrown together a writing prompt, as we like to do, as this is the Kenyon Review, and you are all readers and writers, and we've been hearing from writers. So I was playing around with this idea, Ira, that you talked about really everything that goes on is actually happening in our heads. And I was thinking about the fact that in these 2 memoirs, and I actually started to wonder about this in regards to memoirs, all memoirs, you find yourselves in situations where you realize that you want something other than what you wanted before. In fact, Ira, I think you talked about the wanting. So the writing prompt for all of you tonight is to write about your relationship or your history with something that you want and couch it into a scene or a moment where nothing is happening. Again, that is to write about your relationship or history with something that you want and couch it in a scene or a moment where nothing is happening.
That's awesome.
Well, I got it from you guys.
No, that's awesome. That's great.
I just wrote it in the chat. I so love that. It's a beautiful little baby of what we've done tonight.
Seriously, it's all, and it's memoir. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Ocean and Sarah, for your assistance, for the amazing introductions. Thank you, Ira and Amy, for your work. That is such a treat to show up for and hear you read from. And thank you, audience, for giving us your time tonight. We do have another reading coming on November 17th, and it's going to feature prose writers from our most recent Kenyon Review issue, 3 of them. So please come back and join us. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. I so appreciate it.
Thank you. Good night.